myocardial ischemia. We know that angina pectoris is the cardinal manifestation of myocardial ischemia and coronary artery disease. But the most common manifestation of coronary artery disease, as assessed by ambulatory ECG monitoring, is actually silent, which is asymptomatic myocardial ischemia. So, how do we define silent myocardial ischemia? It is defined as the presence of objective evidence of myocardial ischemia in the absence of angina or other anginal equivalents. What do we mean by these objective evidence of ischemia? It is either by ECG echo or myocardial perfusion imaging. ECG as in the exercise ECG testing, or the ambulatory ECG monitoring. Echo, which shows reversible regional wall motion abnormalities, which were noted during exercise or and which revert back to normal upon rest. And MPI is the reversible perfusion defects noted during radionuclide studies. So coming to the epidemiology, several studies between 1980s and 90s showed that around 25 to 45% of patients with coronary artery disease have myocardial ischemia during daily life, and most of these episodes are not associated with chest pain. That is around more than 75% of the episodes of ischemia may not be associated with chest pain. Sorry. Furthermore, most of these episodes occurred during a minimal or no physical exertion. So people who are at increased risk of silent ischemia are, like, as we all know, the diabetics, elderly people, those with prior MI or prior surgical revascularization. And in addition to this would be heart transplant patients. As you know, that it is denervated, so they'll be more susceptible to silent ischemia. Classification for silent ischemia is given by Kohn et al. In 2003. They divided it into three types. So type 1 is totally asymptomatic individuals with no prior history of any coronary artery disease and who have incidentally detected silent myocardial ischemia. Type 2 involves those who are asymptomatic after having an acute episode of MI. So after an ACS, those who are asymptomatic and have evidence of silent ischemia are type 2. And type 3 are those who have both symptomatic as well as asymptomatic episodes. That is, patients with stable or unstable or maybe even vasospastic angina, but who have evidence of silent ischemia. This is the most common type, type 3. And the type 1, that is in totally asymptomatic individuals, is the least common type. Again, type 2 and type 3, as we can see, as they are associated with patients with known or a pre-existing coronary artery disease. So they can be grouped together. So these types can again be rearranged as group 1 patients without a known coronary artery disease and group 2 with a known coronary artery disease. This was given by Kohn et al. And this is the most widely followed classification. Coming to type 1, that is asymptomatic patients. Exercise testing, as we all know, is one of the main tools to detect silent ischemia in these populations. The estimates of prevalence of silent myocardial ischemia in this type varies widely according to the population studied and also according to the methodology used. It varies from as low as 1% to as high as 20 to 40%. One of the earliest studies was done by the US Air Force in 1975. They studied around close to 1,400 men who were in the Air Force, 111 of whom had positive exercise ECG test. And out of these, 34 like all these who were positive underwent coronary angiogram, and 34 out of them had lesions of more than 50% stenosis. That is 2.5% incidence in asymptomatic Air Force men. Another study by Flegg et al. In 1990, they showed that there is progressive increase in the prevalence of exercise-induced silent ischemia in apparently healthy individuals, like increasing with age. In 2000, he et al. They showed that the severity of coronary artery calcium by electron beam CT can predict the occurrence of silent ischemia on stress spec. We'll come to it later. In a study of 631 patients with diabetes and at least 2 additional risk factors for coronary artery disease, but no history of coronary artery disease, silent myocardial ischemia was seen in 22% of patients with MPI. So this says that there is a wide variety of values that we get depending upon the population we study and the methodology we use. Coming to type 2 or 3, or that is the group 2 patients who are patients with a known history of coronary artery disease. Cohn et al. In its original publication, they say that 30 to 43% of patients who were asymptomatic after an acute episode of MI had an evidence of silent ischemia in the initial 1 month by Holter. In a total of 2,286 hours of technically adequate recordings, there were 411 episodes of transient ST segment abnormalities were documented, out of which around 75% were asymptomatic. In another study, around 50% cases of both stable and unstable CAD were found to have silent ischemic episodes on ambulatory ECG. In prospective Heart and Salt study, which enrolled around 937 patients with stable CAD, prevalence of angina alone was 14%, and prevalence of inducible ischemia without angina was around 20%. So again, here the silent ischemia had more prevalence compared to symptomatic ischemia. Also in this study, they found that inducible ischemia without self-reported angina had poorer outcomes. So patients with silent MI on ambulatory ECG, it was also found that these patients will have more frequently multivessel CAD and more advanced coronary artery disease. In a study of 439 patients with silent MI on ambulatory ECG, multivessel CAD was found in around 75% of cases, and 37% of whom had significant triple vessel disease. As we all know that atherosclerotic coronary artery disease is the most common cause of ischemia, but not all anatomic coronary artery disease would result in silent ischemia. In patients with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease, confirmation of occurrence of myocardial ischemia, that is by either by ECG, echo, or MPI, in the absence of symptoms, is necessary for labeling it as SMI, silent myocardial ischemia. Now, a brief about silent myocardial infarction. MI without symptoms or MI with atypical symptoms is usually used to designate silent MI. In the Framingham study, around 20 to 40% or approximately 1/3 of all MIs can be silent was what was proposed, and prognosis was as bad as the recognized MI. And in prospective 30-year follow-up of patients aged 30 to 62 years, there was a 31% incidence of MI, and half of whom had no symptoms or had atypical symptoms. That is, they fitted into the criteria of silent MI. Also, 19% of patients presenting with STEMI would have had a prior MI in another vascular territory. That was what was found by ECG. And more than 1/3 or maybe 7% of all these presenting with STEMI had a silent MI. All these would increase the risk of adverse events. Patients with silent MI can have a presentation with heart failure also, which is more likely, which was documented by a Rotterdam study, which was published in 2010. The silent MI in past could have been detected by either like presence of QFs or late gadolinium enhancement or MRI, as we all know. Now coming to the pathophysiology, a brief about normal cardiac pain mechanisms. We know that the afferent fibers from the heart by the cardiac sympathetic nerves are usually thought as the essential pathway for transmission of cardiac pain. They are later projected to the thalamus and the reticular formation in the brain. The atria and the ventricles both are abundantly supplied with sympathetic sensory innervation, and these they go to the sympathetic ganglia, from there to the dorsal column of the spinal cord of the upper 5 thoracic vertebra, and from there they are transmitted to the hypothalamus and limbic system, and then to the neocortex. This is just a diagrammatic representation. Also, a mechanical stimulus or stretching of the coronary arteries was also proposed as a cause of pain, even when ischemia itself was not induced. This theory also has received increasing support because we know that during PTCA, at the higher inflation pressure we go, more intense pain we may cause. So the stretching of the coronary arteries is also one of the proposed mechanism. Also, like convergence of sensory pain signals from visceral organs, like the principle for referred pain or the vaguely localized visceral pain. I will not go into the detail, but we just know that we can just go through it later. The convergence of projection theory. Now coming to the pathophysiology of silent myocardial ischemia. There are various proposed theories. We'll come to it one by one. First is the altered pain threshold. The pioneering studies done by Droste and Roskman suggested that the differences between coronary patients with with or without angina during a positive exercise test they studied, and they determined the pain perception. When the pain perception was determined by the electrical current applied to the thigh, those patients who had asymptomatic myocardial ischemia had a significantly higher threshold. And subsequent studies also confirmed the same thing. So a higher threshold for pain could have been one of the proposed mechanisms for silent MI. Another is the central mechanism was suggested in 1996 by Rosen et al. They used PET scanning to measure the cerebral blood flow in patients with and without ischemia. And they postulated that abnormal central processing of efferent cardiac pain signals could be involved in the pathophysiology of this syndrome. Another one is the role of endorphins. Varying concentrations of these opioid-like substances exist in plasma and CSF. Data from PTS studies by Falcon et al. And Alroy et al. They found that endorphin release to be common during both, both had opposing findings. Falcon et al. Suggested a link between endorphin levels and symptoms, but Alroy et al. They found that it was almost similar between patients who had symptoms and who didn't have. So again, this is a bit controversial, but one of the proposed mechanism. Another one is neuropathy or albuminuria associated with diabetes. We know that diabetics may have overt neuropathy as a contributing factor to the silent ischemia, although neuropathy may also be subclinical and could be detected by demonstration of autonomic impairment. This is a study where we can see that on follow-up, patients who had both silent myocardial ischemia and microalbuminuria had a lower event-free survival at 5 years follow-up. And those who had neither of them had a better survival. So silent ischemia and microalbuminuria both are associated with increased risk of adverse events in diabetics. Another proposed theory for pathophysiology of silent ischemia is regarding denervation. We know that patients with heart transplant have they don't experience pain at least during the initial part until reinnervation might have occurred. Also, chronic disruption of cardiac innervation can occur following an MI if the infarcted tissues include sympathetic efferent fibers which are serving the ischemic region. Another proposed theory is the benzodiazepine receptors on leukocytes. They have found that patients with silent MI would have increased benzodiazepine receptors on leukocytes, and which was again one of the proposed mechanism of asymptomatic ischemia. And the same group also showed that there was an increased amount of anti-inflammatory cytokines in patients with silent ischemia as compared to the patients who had symptomatic ischemia. The last thing what they suggested was the concept of neural stunning. This theory postulates that one brief episode of ischemia, which might be angina provoking, induces a temporary inhibition of the sympathetic neural conduction, during which the subsequent episodes of ischemia are rendered painless. Again, this theory would explain how one episode of ischemia could be painful and the next painless in the same patient with the same ischemic stimulus. Just a diagrammatic representation of the same, that the first episode, which lasted for around 30 minutes, was painful, and then subsequent episodes during the period of neural stunning did not result in any pain. Again, later on, the episode was associated with pain. Diabetics are at a particular risk of silent myocardial ischemia. In a study by Zellweger et al., prevalence of silent CAD was around 6 to 23% in low-risk diabetic patients, whereas in high-risk diabetic patients, the prevalence was as high as 60%. Also, there was an independent association of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance in patients with silent CAD and type 2 DM. Now, silent versus symptomatic ischemia. Like classical angina pectoris occurs during exertion at higher heart rates, whereas silent ischemia is more likely to occur during periods of low activity, including rest or sleep, with onset at lower heart rates. While painful ischemia typically lasts only a few minutes, silent ischemia can occur for minutes to over an hour. And the diurnal pattern of ischemia is also seen with silent ischemia. Coming to the diagnosis of silent ischemia, as we have already seen, that it requires objective confirmation of myocardial ischemia in the absence of angina, which could be either by stress testing or by ambulatory ECG. The initial studies in the 70s and 80s utilized ambulatory ECG, mainly utilized ambulatory ECG to document silent ischemia, but later on it has lost its importance because of the low accuracy of it, a lot of false negatives and false positives. Stress testing is the one which is mainly used. Treadmill test with the usual criteria. Stress MPA, again, reduced perfusion on stress, which normalizes at rest, and stress echo, as we all know, which also a brief about coronary artery calcium scoring. We know that coronary artery calcium is present in most patients with myocardial ischemia, whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic. Various studies have showed that there is at the most modest correlation between silent ischemia as detected by stress testing and coronary artery calcium. In a study of around 1200 patients with known coronary artery disease who underwent MPI and coronary artery calcium scoring in close temporal proximity, they found that among the 76 patients who had stress MPI positive, like stress-induced ischemia positive on MPI, hardly 5% patients had no coronary artery calcium. That is, more than 0 was found in 95% of patients. The score of more than or equal to 100 was found in 88% of patients who had a positive stress test. And coronary artery calcium score of more than 400 was found in 68% of patients. Again, looking at this in another way is that out of the patients who had coronary artery calcium score of more than 400, like around 32% of patients had coronary artery calcium score less than 400. In another study, SPECT was performed on asymptomatic patients along with coronary artery calcium, and silent myocardial ischemia was documented by SPECT in 2.6% of patients with coronary calcium score of 11 to 100, and 46% of patients had a silent MI in patients with coronary artery calcium score of more than 400. So again, more than 50% of patients with coronary artery calcium score of more than 400 did not have silent MI on SPECT, silent myocardial ischemia on SPECT. So there is not a very good correlation. At the most, we can say there is a modest correlation between the two.
Meet this one and previous one. What is this thing? There they are telling as the calcium score increases, the chance of having silent MI decreases. In this one, the upper one.
No, not at all.
What they told? What exactly they told? Among 76 patients with stress-induced ischemia on MPI, calcium scores. What are these numbers? 95, 88, and 68.
Like percentage of patients who had out of the 76 patients who turned out to be stress MPI positive, 68 patients had coronary artery calcium score more than 400. Okay, and maybe 20% of cases had coronary artery calcium score between 100 and 400, and the remaining 7% of cases had a coronary artery calcium score between 0 and 100, and less than 5%, around 5% of cases had no coronary artery calcium, but they had evidence of stress-induced ischemia on MPI.
Okay.
You got it? Okay. This is again the score which was given by the ESC 2019 chronic coronary syndrome guidelines. The ESC 2019 guidelines, they give that the ambulatory ECG only class 1 indication is in patients who have chest pain and who are suspected to have arrhythmias along with chest pain. Only in them ambulatory ECG is recommended. Otherwise, another class 2 indication is in patients with a suspected vasospastic angina. Otherwise, there are no indications for ambulatory ECG as of now. Again, the recommendation for exercise stress test, we all know this. I think I've just mentioned it so that we can read it next time whenever required. Again, recommendation for assessing for coronary artery disease in asymptomatic subjects. Risk assessment and all is class 1. Only these are class 1, rest all of them are class 2B. And routine use of coronary CT in low risk or non-diabetic individuals for just assessment is class 3. Now coming to the management, patients with silent myocardial ischemia in presence of known CAD, that is group 2, they should be treated as per guidelines for stable CAD or secondary prevention, as they already have a CAD, so that they would fall in chronic coronary syndromes. there is no ideal therapy which is specifically targeted for silent ischemia. Although experts agree that silent ischemia mandates appropriate treatment to minimize the effect of ischemic episodes on the myocardium. So antiplatelets, statins, beta blockers, CCBs, and nitrates, the usual armamentarium of the ischemic heart disease, along with risk factor control and modification. In one study by Davis et al., they found that beta blockers, they tended to be more effective than calcium channel blockers.
Meet.
Also with, yeah.
What is the rationale of using nitrates here, or
will come. The studies will come to it. Yeah. So first of all, should we treat, like, studies which show that whether should we treat or should we just go for risk factor modification? The Tibet study, they enrolled 682 patients with chronic stable angina and ST segment depression on treadmill. They were randomized to receive nifedipine, beta blockers, or both, with a follow-up of 2 years, and used MACE and treatment failures as endpoints. In low-risk population, presence of silent ischemia did not affect cardiac prognosis. But more aggressive medical therapy, it tended to reduce hard endpoints in the groups with and without ischemia on Holter. We see that the combination was more effective and then atenolol and nifedipine. Another study was the TIBS study, total ischemic burden bisoprolol study. This study also supported the concept that treating ischemia, whether painful or asymptomatic, it is beneficial. It enrolled both symptomatic as well as asymptomatic ischemia. The SWISSY studies, SWISSY 1 and SWISSY 2 studies are frequently quoted studies. The Swiss International Study on Silent Ischemia Type 1 was studied. It enrolled patients with silent ischemia and they randomized it to medical management versus only risk factor control. And we see that at around 15 years of follow-up, the medical management group did far better compared to the only risk factor modification group. Coming to the medical therapy versus revascularization, the ASIP trial, asymptomatic cardiac ischemia pilot study, it tested various strategies to reduce silent ischemia. Eligible patients had evidence of asymptomatic ischemia on ambulatory ECG, an abnormal exercise test, and stable CAD with at least 50% stenosis. The participants were randomized to medical therapy versus revascularization with a PCI or CABG. And medical therapy was again subdivided into angina-guided strategy, ischemia-guided strategy with use of anti-angina medications to eliminate symptoms, or silent ischemia on ambulatory ECG, whatever was present. Again, angina or ischemia was controlled either with atenolol along with nifedipine or dilzem with isotropide 900 if it was necessary. The primary outcome at 12 weeks was the absence of ischemic episodes on ambulatory ECG. At 12 weeks, patient who had more significant suppression of ischemic events during I think I've copied the wrong slide. I'll just get back. But they again suggested that the someone has kept two speakers in the same, so it is echoing. This ASIP study basically suggested that in low-risk population, medical therapy was almost comparable to revascularization, but in high-risk population, revascularization had a significant benefit over medical therapy. Again, COURAGE and STITCH trials, as we all know that COURAGE documented similar outcomes between medical therapy and PCI group. And STITCH trial for surgical treatment for ischemic heart failure, they suggested there was no difference in all-cause mortality. So these findings, along with those of COURAGE and STITCH, would suggest that certain patients, optimal medical therapy may have comparable impact on ischemia reduction to that of revascularization, but in higher risk population, revascularization may be documented, may be required.
Which trial the CV trial mortality was found that improved with CABG, no?
STITCH trial, they said that there was the CV mortality was improved, but the all-cause mortality was almost similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
10-year improved.
No, even all-cause mortality improved at 10 years.
Okay.
Extension. Stitches.
Yeah. Okay. Then I would have only seen this STITCH. Sorry. So the CAPE trial, they found that amlodipine plus atenolol was associated with less ambulatory ischemia compared to dilsem plus isocarbide dinitrate. Also, the drug-free period in these cases was associated with lesser ischemic events in amlodipine and atenolol, as we could relate it to the longer duration of action of these drugs. Now coming to Swiss 2 trial, Swissy 2 trial, it enrolled 201 patients with silent ischemia after MI, and they were randomized either to OMT or PCI. OMT, which included bisoprolol plus or minus amlodipine. The primary endpoint was sudden cardiac death. At a mean follow-up of around 10 years, 12 sudden cardiac death episodes occurred, out of which only 1 was in PCI group, and the rest 11 were in optimal medical management group. But again, this trial received some criticism, saying that it was a very small study with a small sample size, and the results were too good to be true. But this is what this Swiss trial document showed. So the conclusions from Swiss trial were the silent myocardial ischemia after MI is associated with increased risk of sudden cardiac death. Occurrence of SCD can be lowered by revascularization, and PCI may benefit SCD, which is due to the lesser reductions of LV function on follow-up. In summary, majority of ischemic episodes are silent. Various theories of central and peripheral pain processing have been suggested. Again, they are divided into 3 types. 1 is who are totally asymptomatic. 2 is post-MI. 3 is in stable or in unstable angina patients. Prevalence varies according to the group studied. Ambulatory ECG and exercise testing were commonly used. Prognosis is equivalent to that of symptomatic ischemia. Treatment again is similar to symptomatic ischemia and better outcomes with revascularization. Medical management an option for low risk patients. Prognosis of each group was given nicely and up to date, but I think it would exceed that for a 10-mark question. So I've not included it. I'll forward that. So this is silent MI. And Gaurav, for your question regarding nitrates, there is no study which said that nitrates and placebo control, but nitrates were used in 2 or 3 studies along with diltiazem, and they showed reduction in symptoms and episodes of ischemia. And many places they have just mentioned that silent myocardial ischemia should be treated on similar lines as chronic coronary syndromes in those with or without presence of coronary artery disease, like chronic coronary syndromes. So that was why I mentioned that.
See, this thing, basically, that type 3 is the most common type.
Most common, yeah.
Even a patient who has angina, they, as you mentioned, that many of them have many more episodes of silent ischemia.
Yeah.
So in those subsets, I think nitrate is giving nitrate is rational.
What they say is nitrate reduces symptoms, no doubt, but again it improves the blood flow also, right? Silent ischemia doesn't necessarily mean that there is no ischemia. Ischemia is ongoing, but because of altered pain perception or many other theories that we saw. So nitrates, in that sense, they would be benefiting because it certainly relieves the ischemia, as we know. The angina.
Right, but if you say that means that then they should have a role in event modification also, which they obviously don't have. So that is why the doubt arises.
Okay. Maybe I'm too
incapable
to answer
it's a very debatable thing.
Yeah.
No, actually, the one of the components of silent ischemia is I mean, that is why there is a circadian rhythm to it. No, they say basically that it's highest during the morning.
Morning to noon. Yeah.
So what is the reason for early morning high incidence of ischemia?
One of the reasons is that basically catecholamines are high, so MI can be higher in patients. See, one of the theories which Meet has mentioned, no, they have exactly the same pathophysiology as a normal ischemia. It's just that the pain fails to reach the threshold in people who are prone to it. That's all. So they don't feel the pain, but everything what happens in a normal MI happens in them, like increase in heart rate, increase in this thing, drop in BP, all those things. So, which is why one school of thought is that if a person has had an MI, irrespective of whether he's had a silent or not, you have to treat him the same way, basically, like what Meet was saying. But yeah, again, like he correctly pointed out, basically Swissy too, and even Dynamy for that matter, actually, Dynamy trial also had a set of silent ischemic people who were benefited from PCI, but then both of them were not. I mean, Swissy 2 was actually targeted to look at the benefit of PCI, but Dynamy 2 was not specifically for silent ischemia. I mean, not
even
Dynamy 2.
ischemia. Even the ischemia study had a population, subpopulation of silent MI, but like we'll have to go into the details.
No, I'll tell you about ischemia study. But no, I wanted to ask you a detail, the small thing if you had come across. See, after an MI, let's say somebody has come with an MI with pain, classic pain, and then comes back 4 weeks or 2 weeks with I mean, with some vague symptoms, and you do a stress test, because routine we don't do, or routine ambulatory ECG we don't do.
Yeah.
Let's say he wanted to get back to his job, and we have done a stress test. So, do we call it silent ischemia?
We call it, but then what this article from Up to Date, this is nicely it is described that post ACS, in the initial part it was not significantly correlated with the future outcome, but later it was.
No, so it's basically finding ischemia but no pain at that time, no?
Yeah, of course.
No, I'll tell you why I had this doubt. See, because the way ischemia trial was done, no? So ischemia trial was basically recruiting people who all came to OPD, and they have basically some high risk or underwent a stress test in the form of in the form of a TMT, or in the form of basically a nuclear testing, imaging testing.
Yeah.
We found moderate to severe ischemia. They have recruited for doing a CTCAG before randomization. That's how ischemia trial worked out, right? But the in the trial mentioned is only Seattle angina questionnaire, where it says basically angina daily, monthly, weekly, or in the past 3 months, or ever had history of angina. So that's how even the percentages are. So basically, it's very hard to actually, there is an editorial which came after the ischemia trial, where when they try to look at what is the benefit of, ischemia revascularization on silent MI, they were finding it hard to basically quantify that silent ischemia.
Because
documentation of the pain during the provocation of the test. These are all patients who had some angina in the past. But then,
so they've not correlated the pain with the documented ischemic episode, right? That is what you're saying.
Like, let's say, because you cannot include the patient who has had a pain in the past, because then all the there wouldn't be a set of post ACS silent ischemia segment itself, no? Like in a known coronary artery disease.
Correct.
So if you don't have ischemia at the time of eliciting the reversible changes of ischemia, then you have silent ischemia, right?
Yeah, correct.
So, but then that part has not been answered in ischemia. So because the ischemia trial, if you look at it, basically both the intervention arm and the placebo arm, both of them had only 30% of patients who have had pain in the past 3 months. So they were actually as asymptomatic as that. And daily angina was only 2% if you see both the arms. And angina history was 90% in both, basically, according to the Seattle angina questionnaire. So if you take true ischemia patients, true silent ischemia patients would be the 10% segment, which they have actually not specifically looked at as a sub-analysis, whether or not they, with no history of angina, but this 3 months history of angina, I told, no, that 30% had. That they have subgroup analysis, and they found that there was some trend to benefit among patients who had angina rather than among the ones who did not in the past 3 months. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. Meet.
Hello, Pa.
Yeah, adu iga like type 1, type 2, type 3 silent ischemia idiyala. So is there any difference in the outcomes between these two groups? And like the type 1 and one with the type 1, the other is a type 2, or a type 2 and a type 3.
I could not find any article with such difference, but they said that See again, type 1, we saw that patients who didn't have any symptom of pain, but who had documented evidence of ischemia, they usually will have multivessel or triple vessel disease. So they might have a bad prognosis or poor prognosis. That could be interpreted, but there is no clear-cut trial or data which shows the difference between these types.
Andre, like, I mean,
but they are
what I
different
wanted to
subsets,
know,
no?
Andre,
Type 1 is a very different subset from type 2 and type 3, no?
That's what
Type 1 is type 1 has no like history of any myocardial infarction in the past. Type 2 and type 3 have myocardial infarction in the past, no? Type 2 and type 3.
Yeah.
So they are very different subsets. I don't know if we should compare, but I don't. Yeah, type 2 and type 3 are comparable, but type 1 is a totally different subset.
And even in Braunwald classification of angina also, the silent ischemia is there, no? Some subset.
Silent ischemia is there. We are not had anginal episodes in the past 1 month or like 48 hours is there.
There's no silent ischemia in Braunwald classification.
No, it is for pain, so you will not have that.
And yeah, anyways, we have 2 topics now. Next, anything else actually, Meet?
And regarding this cardiac innervation, it is like atrias are more innervated with parasympathetic and ventricles with sympathetic. Is it right or like different?
Sympathetic C is there in both, but parasympathetic basically ends at the AV node. So below the AV node, will not have the parasympathetic supply. This pain, the pain is sensed by sympathetic exclusively, and that is innervated in both the atria and the ventricle. But the parasympathetic is there only up to the AV node and not in the ventricles.
Okay.
I will tell.
Varun, what will we have next?
Tempo, is Raghavan ready? Then we'll just finish it off.
Raghavan is ready. He will present, I think.
Yeah, because I think Gaurav can do it because it's a big topic. Maybe
Raghavan at gunpoint.
Yeah, I think.
Panikulra.
Gunpoint, knife point.
Oh, wait, open Raghavan.
But somehow Funny is studying in library. I don't understand how it's possible.
Trying.
Even librarians are sitting outside, man.
This paint business in hostel is like crazy. You should see now. There's no point. Have you come to hostel of late?
No.
You should see it now. It's like you might inhale some toxic fumes and drop.
We have the protective N95. Let's see if it works.
No, rather than fixing the roof, they're randomly painting it now. I don't know what.
What are they painting? They're painting outside.
Yeah, they're just whitewashing the hostel. For what I don't.
No, to hide the obvious dirt.
Speak.
Speak, it's in.
Who is guiding all this? Funny.
He's presenting from phone.
Can we see the video? Funny.
Dimpu, you have
Swipe right
on hemodynamics of VSD somewhere? Anyone has read?
Penny.
Hey,
there is a chapter we discussed. No, that wonder what is that? 2018 or PG book. One of these two has a natural history of VSD. Hemodynamics it doesn't have, I think. No, okay. That is natural history. You wanted hemodynamics, huh? Funny?
Yeah. Hemodynamics of VSD.
Ask Gautam, you would have searched like crazy.
Funny. ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ನೋಡಿ.
Raghavan, ready? Huh?
Funny.
Hello.
Is Raghavan ready? See Anika's face.
Hey, why is Raghavan not talking?
Raghavan sollara.
Hello.
Hello, Raghavan, start.
I have one PPT on hemodynamics of VSD, which was presented some 2 years back in our seminar.
Where? Nimbu? Varun. See, Venkatesh.
Out of excitement, forgetting names.
This is too funny. Funny.
Venkatesh, you send me it, man.
Funny, but I have to warn you, Kapil sir remembers all the previous presentations.
Yeah, we'll update something.
Yeah.
Just changing the background won't help.
Raghavan சொல்லுங்க.
கேக்குதா ஜி? கேக்குதா?
கேக்குது.
It is natural history of VSD, not hemodynamics. Sorry. Who is presenting natural history of VSD? There are so many people in previous PPT.
Praveen Raja.
Okay.
Funny is so disappointed.
Hello.
Raghavan, can you make it landscape and slideshow?
இது மொபைல்ல இருக்கே அதுல என்ன பண்றது?
இது போனை திருப்பினா போதுங்க. ஜஸ்ட் லேண்ட்ஸ்கேப் திருப்பினா
ஓகே. ஓகே தெரியுதா?
வந்துருச்சு. தெரியுது கிளியரா.
No need.
Okay. Going to this topic, novel anti-angiogenic. This is from the ESC 2019 guidelines. It shows that stepwise approach for chronic stable angina. First step is short-acting nitrates with beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. In case of high heart rate, you can use dihydropyridine CCBs. In case of low heart rate, you can use dihydropyridine CCBs. As a first step, in case of LV dysfunction, heart failure, beta blockers as first step. If symptoms persist, you have to go to second step, which is combining beta blocker with CCBs. And in case of low heart rate, you can't add blockers, so you are going to long-acting nitrates. In case of LV dysfunction, you have to go to ivabradine. In the third step, the second-line drugs are added. So these are the novel anti-agenals, the second-line drugs. The second-line drugs are this is the same slide which shows how to manage with heart rate more than 60. If heart rate and BP is above, BP is more than 120 and heart rate is more than 60, we can go with beta blocker or calcium channel blocker, and we have to add ranolazine or ivabradine. If it is BP is already less than 120, you have to directly go to second-line drugs like ranolazine, ivabradine, or trimetazidine. If already bradycardia is there, you have to go to bradycardia with normal BP. You have to go with dihydropyridine CCPs followed by ranolazine. If bradycardia with hypotension is there, you have to directly go to ranolazine with trimetazidine. This is given in PSI 2018. And going to the newer anti-anginals, 4 things are there: ranolazine, ivabradine, nicorandil, and trimetazidine. In which ranolazine is only approved by FDA. And all other things in the right side, all are investigational drugs like vesodil, testosterone, allopurinol, all other drugs they are trying. Going to the first drug, ranolazine, it acts by inhibiting the late sodium current. By inhibiting late sodium current, it prevents sodium overload and calcium overload. So it decreases diastolic tension and microvascular compression. So it decreases oxygen demand. So it causes relief of angina. This is the only FDA approved drug, and it is also a partial fatty acid inhibitor. It is a piperazine derivative. The half-life is in sustained release form, it is 7 hours. It is metabolized by cytochrome P3A4 enzyme. So the drugs which are inhibitors or inducers, we have to adjust the dose of the ranolazine. In case of using with simvastatin, they are telling that simvastatin dose should be less than 20 milligram. Better to not to combine that. The dose is starting with 500 milligram BD, followed if further symptomatic, you have to go to 1 gram BD. Ranolazine has antiarrhythmic action in atrium. It inhibits peak sodium current and inward potassium rectifier current. In ventricles, it inhibits late sodium channel. So it prevents atrial fibrillation in acute coronary syndrome, and it causes conversion of post of AF to sinus rhythm. And it has some effect on reducing HbA1c. The main adverse effects are QTc prolongation. It is dose dependent, but ranolazine is not a reverse use dependent, so it didn't cause any torsades de pointes. And other side effects are dizziness and constipation. These are the three. These are the trials. In case of chronic stable angina, that the first three trials, that Marisa is monotherapy comparison with placebo, and that Carissa and Erica that are on the top of the regular therapy, they used ranolazine for anti-anginal. In all the trials, it proven that it reduces the angina frequency and the angina duration. In NSTEMI, this Merlin-TIMI trial, in that also it didn't reduce the primary endpoint, but it reduces the angina frequency. Going to the next drug, Nicorandil. It is a nicotinamide derivative. It acts by a mechanism of stimulating guanylyl cyclase and increasing cycling GMP levels. And it also activates potassium channel and hyperpolarization. So it causes dilatation of both the coronary and peripheral vasodilatation. And it is also used in hyperemia testing and renal production during PCA. The regular dose we are using is 5 to 20 milligram BD. The main side effects are headache, flushing. They mentioned that GI ulcerations will come. The trial is IONA trial. It is impact of Nicorandil in angina trial. In this trial, this drug proves to be decreases cardiac death and MI. This is about Nicorandil. Going to ivabradine. This is a use-dependent selective sinus node Funny channel inhibitor. The picture shows that it will acts more on the open state, so it is use-dependent, and it will prevent the late diastolic depolarization. So it will cause mechanism. It has so many mechanisms. So like decreasing heart rate, suppression of arrhythmias, VT, and the infarct size reduction and inflammation reduction and oxidative stress they are mentioning. It has a complete oral absorption. It has cytochrome P3A for metabolism. Effective half-life is 11 hours. It is used as in a dose of 5 to 7.5 milligram BD. The main side effects are the most commonly asked about the POSPINs. POSPINs is due to there is a hyperpolarization current in retina, which is also get inhibited by this drug. So they will have the flashing light effects. That is called POSPINs. Other side effects are like bradycardia, AV block, or atrial fibrillation like that. So that so many trials are there in this. They mentioned the Signify trials, which is recently come. And they selected stable CAD with heart rate more than 70 per minute. This improves the angina class, but there is no mortality benefit. In beautiful trial, they included the LV dysfunction patients in sinus rhythm. In that also it reduces the hospitalization and revascularization, but no mortality benefit. Going to the next drug, trimetazidine. Trimetazidine is in the group of metabolic modulators to efficiently use the energy efficiency. It will increase by inhibiting the enzyme 3-ketoacyl CoAlase. So it will divert the metabolism from fatty acid to glucose. So increased amount of ATP is produced, and this 1 ATP extra is produced when they use glucose oxidation. So it is a metabolic modulator where that is used in the dose of 35 milligram BD. The main side effects are gastrointestinal and headache. The main thing is it is contraindicated in movement disorders like Parkinson and restless leg syndrome. There are two trials.
This mechanism of action, this trimetazidine.
Nothing. Normally, the heart will use free fatty acid as main substrate. If free fatty acid goes to beta oxidation, it will produce 5.6 ATP per oxygen consumption. It is shown in that chart.
Okay.
So when we inhibit this metabolism during ischemia and divert it to glucose metabolism using substrate as glucose, it will produce per amount of oxygen, it will produce 1 ATP extra, 6.3 ATP.
Okay.
So it will be more efficient. So they are using this drug in this case of heart failure. So two trials are there. One is trimetazidine European multicenter study.
PFOX, this thing PFOX inhibitor means this one only, 3-ketoacyl, which is an enzyme that inhibits.
Same thing. CPUT1 and 2, all these are they have shown that all are PFOX inhibitors only. Etamoxy, roxfenacin, periacillin.
Okay. Okay.
Hey Arun, don't have so many doubts, man. So trimetazidine European multicenter study compared propranolol to the trimetazidine, and it is proven non-inferior in case of angina reduction. Now another study is reduction. Limited number of studies are there. One is rho kinase inhibitors, Fasudil. It prevents vasoconstriction by inhibiting the enzyme rho kinase, the Fasudil, which will cause inhibition of myosin phosphorylation. So they have studied, they proven that time to ST depression is prolonged, but the time to angina and frequency is not affected. They used in the trial, they used the dose of 80 milligram BD. So other drugs are this allopurinol. It is seen. Slide is seen or not?
Not seen, Raghavan.
Oh yes.
Now it's seen.
So allopurinol they tried because of this. It prevents superoxide formation in endothelium. It is used in the dose of 600 milligram per day. But is no proper studies. So another they tried all these endothelium receptor blockades and testosterone in the mechanism of it improving endothelial function. And even high dose statin, they in the two studies they showed that angina reduction was there. There are two studies, Harvard study and dual study. Then last drug is this malsudomain. It is endothelin EDRF donor. It is also has platelet stabilizing effect. All these drugs are they are trying, and there is no proven trials.
EDRF means it is nitric oxide only, no?
Same thing. Yeah, that's same kind of. So this is the chart which shows the class of indication in this second line drugs. All are in class 2AB, class 2B drugs. In ASC, in ACC it is not mentioned. Only ranolazine is given class 2A. So other non-pharmacological therapies, they tried this external enhanced counter pulsation. Same mechanism is it has like IABP. It was systolic unloading and diastolic augmentation. They are showing that it will also improve cardiac output by increasing preload also. So it will increase shear stress and all growth factors, and it will decrease your neurohormonal activation, and it will increase all this nitric oxide, all vasodilatation factors. The main thing is it will improve collaterals development. That is the main thing. This is given in that that yesterday I posted some that non-pharmacological therapy article. In that it is given this mechanism. It is through improved coronary diastolic perfusion and reduced afterload and coronary flow redistribution, neoangiogenesis and endothelial production. All these mechanisms. It is by sequential distal to proximal. This picture shows that from distal to proximal there will be compression, like by compression around 300 millimeter mercury in early diastole, followed by deflation just before systole. Same like IABP, and it will be used for a 1 hour session, 5 days week. For 7 weeks they have tried. It is given class 2B and ACC and ESC 2A for refractory angina pectoris. This picture shows the same mechanism, systolic unloading and improving diastolic filling, and that is a plethysmographic picture which shows the diastolic augmentation of the pressures. This mechanisms of this chart is given in CSA, our book only. Hello.
Raghavan.
Hello.
Raghavan, both AC and HA is 2B only, no? Hello.
Hello.
Raghavan. Both
this is that refractory angina pectoris on recent article they have published. In that they have given this.
Okay, I think the 2019 stable ischemic heart disease gives it as 2B only. I'll check.
Okay, not 2A.
2B.
Okay, it is published recently only, 2020 January. That article.
I think they have given it by mistake then, because it's 2B in both. Yeah.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
This is the same mechanism. It will increase coronary collaterals and improves cardiac output, endothelial function, and same mechanism. It will improve the heart function. So this indications are when there are abnormal coronary artery, very small vessels, restenosis of stents or grafts, non-cardiac morbid condition, and stable heart failure and LV dysfunction moderate to severe. Contraindications as usual acute AR, severe uncontrolled hypertension. Main is DVT and aortic aneurysm and coagulopathy more than 2.5 INR. And the recent cardiac catheterization, we have puncture femoral vein, we can't use the femoral. There are two studies. One is MUST EECP. They included chronic stable angina patients with positive stress test. They found that time to ST depression and that angina depressing effects were persist even up to 1 year after EECP sessions. There is another one registry, International EECP Patient Registry. It showed that one functional class improvement in angina, and they found that even cardiac perfusion is improved. In that registry, they showed that that effects were maintained up to 5 years. So there are so many non-pharmacological therapy like spinal cord stimulation. The article is showing that cervical thoracic stellate ganglion blockade, spinal cord stimulation, or subcutaneous electric nerve stimulation we can use. All are these are addressing neural processing, and others to improve myocardial perfusion. They are having this new thing, EECP, transmyocardial laser reverse. All are in trials and no this proven benefit. Yeah, that's all, Dumbo.
Thanks, Raghavan.
Okay.
The reason why I mentioned that, because like basically previously they used to do ECP. Now they are not considering as much because of the fact that in patients with LVEF less than 40, they found that the diastolic loading will actually worsen the heart failure. So patients who have actually come in with refractory angina with some mild LV dysfunction had actually worse. They had worsening of dyspnea. So that's the reason why now they're saying that they have downgraded it, or I'm not sure if it was 2A ever. This time when in the guidelines they mentioned that actually it is 2B. I think one of the reasons could have been this, because it's worsening the thing. And like you said, among the new things, only coronary sinus reducer and this thing, what is that? Spinal cord stimulation, I think, is mentioned again as recommendations. Again, very passing. Yeah, in ESC, saying just passing recommendation. That's all. Spinal cord stimulation. Yeah, spinal cord stimulation has been there from a long time, so it is there even in the 2014 AHA stable CAD. But this 2009 coronary sinus is new. Basically, it is serendipitous finding. It's very interesting. If you read that Beck's article, one guy called Beck basically found that when he was actually coming off bypass by reducing the coronary ostium size, they increased the perfusion turgor pressure actually, so thereby improving the improving the coronary perfusion. So they will basically benefit better by increasing the endocardial ischemia. That's what they say, coronary sinus reducer. So you put a hourglass shaped device with and oversize it. So because of that injury, it will cicatrize a little bit and shrink. The overall coronary sinus size will decrease. So they studied and actually it's approved now. I think it's there.
Dimpu, I have a doubt. If
there in that CCS guidelines,
if coronary sinus size is reduced, what happens? Myocardial hydrostatic pressure will increase. In turn, that that perfusion pressure will reduce. No? If myocardial hydrostatic pressure is increased, maybe with the transfer of this nutrients content, that diffusion from vessels to the myocardium, that might reduce. How it is in the other way?
No, Venki. Basically, the capillaries will overcome the R3 pressure, the external pressure. So that is the point of this coronary sinus thing. At least that's what I've understood. So basically, there is increased LVEDP with myocardial ischemia. So that again worsens the subendocardial ischemia and again worsens the diastolic dysfunction. So that's a vicious cycle. So because of the subendocardial ischemia, because of LVEDP increase is an external force, R3, So that component will increase if you increase the capillary pressure. So the capillary pressure increase can be achieved by coronary sinus reduction.
But in similar way, if myocardial hydrostatic pressure is increasing, in the similar way like LVEDP, it can also compress on capillaries.
No, you are increasing intracapillary pressure. No, not increasing myocardial pressure. You are increasing the intracapillary pressure back. It's a capillary head. No.
Okay.
This trial I only presented in the class.
What is the name of the trial?
Some Carolina trial, I think. Some trial.
Not Carolina. Coryza or Coursera trial.
Coursera. Funny, Teja, you focus on hemodynamics, man. Skip all this.
Yeah.
गौरव 11 बज के भाई सो जा, तुझे उसकी आवाज में भी कोरोटकोव साउंड सुनाई दे रहा है.
हाँ.
Okay, we're not having Gaurav's thing now, no? It's time. Oh. Meet?
Yeah, overdose of Zoom, yaar. Like 2 hours in the afternoon, 1.5 hour in the evening, and still now.
There is evenings thing I missed by half an hour, I think. Anyway, I think they'll put it up.
The recording will come up soon.
Yeah, they'll put it up back.
Recording will be there. They'll upload in the YouTube
channel. New trend, I think, basically that they are you going Zoom. I mean, going on Zoom and then giving it as a YouTube link live, or like tiny URL live, basically.
Yeah. No, that thing is we can upgrade the package for things like webinars and all that. So.
Which one? Zoom?
Zoom, yeah. That's about.
People are not doing. No, that is what I'm saying. Like
$100 or $200 per month. We'll give you that.
See, Lokesh is already put up on the group. Varun.
Okay, I'll watch that.
YouTube link has come up. Today's Ramakrishna.
Everybody is doing it.
So see, what we are doing is we are recording the session and then later uploading on Zoom, right? What they are doing, they're basically going live on YouTube at that time.
Correct. We can also do that actually.
But no, we can. I mean, it will actually be unedited, no, because they are basically disabling all comments, any kind of disturbance, and basically the person who's speaking.
That's the webinar mode.
Correct.
Like $500, $200, whatever upgrade.
Thanks, Raghavan.
Okay, guys. Bye. Good night. Venkatesh has already started listening to Ramasir's talk.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Okay, good night.